Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Krishna, and this is your message to us. Please help us absorb this. So we've been through very interesting sessions till date. 5 sessions, and Shashiji, to tell you the truth, I don't want to stop. This has been such a very interesting discovery for myself. Putting together these sessions, doing the requisite research. I'm thoroughly enjoying myself. I find myself to be in a very blessed state of mind at this point of time. And to that, I must thank the Hindu Economic Forum, especially my good friend Prashant, and you, Shashiji, and of course, Dr. Nair, Mr. Palasar, Ashwin. Thank you so much, everybody, for putting this together. So the 6 sessions that we've been through till now, we started off by talking about how can you overcome conditioning challenges of the mind, make your restless mind a slave of your heart. Then we talked about the power of thinking I can. How do we get this whole concept of Aham Brahmasmi working for us? And then we talked about how you take accountability for your future. That don't leave it to somebody else, but you actually take accountability, move up the accountability ladder, as we call that. And then we talked about the 4 types of action: inaction, reaction, inefficient action, and significant action, and how we can make that part of our life. And yesterday we talked about the attitudes that you need to cultivate so that you can reach the goal that are there. And we talked about the 18 different attitudes and how those attitudes can help us. So we continue with this journey. As I told you in the beginning, this is a fine thread that Krishna has helped all of us weave through our lives and implement the same in every aspect of our life. So today we continue with that particular journey. We are talking now about the attitudes or the behaviors that do not allow you to reach your goal. Okay, yesterday we talked about what enables you. Today we are going to talk about what are some of those issues that can come in the way of your achieving your goal, especially from today's situation that we find ourselves in, this very strange situation where all of us have hit a collective pause button in our life, not just in India, but across the world, and the need for each of us to reboot our life and to figure out how we're going to make some sense where we are. So we're going to look at some amount of depth of the 6 deadly sins, as I call them: Kama, desire; Krodha, anger; Lobha, greed; Mada, pride; Moha, attachment; and Matsarya, which is jealousy. So when we examined yesterday the attitudes, and if you recall, I called this attitude is a habit of thought. And I said, if you look at a habit of thought, and what should we inculcate in the way we look at ourselves, the way we manage ourselves, the way we manage the people that we work with, others, and the way we manage our work. And if you look at these 3 things, and what are the kind of attitudes that will help us achieve our goal, our high purpose in life. And if you recall, we said that these are all listed in chapter 13 from verses 7 to 11. So when we're looking at these, the point is that is it easy? Okay. And Mahatma Gandhi, in his absolutely fantastic book, and I urge all of you to please read it, which is My Experiments with Truth. This absolutely fascinating book that he writes somewhere in the 1920s, almost 100 years ago. And it's brilliant. So in the end of it, Mahatma Gandhi actually concludes by saying that the path is hard and steep. It's not easy. So even if you were to inculcate these attitudes, even if you were to inculcate these thought processes, it's not going to be easy. And that's the whole purpose of life. That if you recall, we talked about it in one of the sessions saying, don't take the easy option, life will become hard. If you take the hard option, then life actually becomes easy. So Arjuna in chapter 6, verse 34, he tells Krishna, he says, "Oh Krishna, the mind is restless." He says, "Chanchalam hi mana Krishna." How can I make, the mind is so, it is restless, it is turbulent, it is stubborn, it is strong. To gain mastery of the mind is as difficult as it is to control the wind. So Krishna, while you are telling us all of these, that these are some great attitudes for me to inculcate, I need to be reminded again and again about what can I do to gain control over the mind and move to my higher purpose. And today we're going to look at that. We looked yesterday at attitudes, and we said an attitude is a habit of thought. If you recall, in the very first session we said it is thoughts that lead to action. And yesterday we made a fine distinction, and we said that an attitude is nothing but a habit of thought. So the more times you make this into a habit, the more this particular thought process of yours becomes a habit, then that becomes your attitude. An attitude is something that is part of your thought process, part of your mental makeup. Today, let me tell you that if thought leads to action, then a certain repetitiveness of that action becomes your behavior. So an action is nothing but a habit. Okay, now behavior is nothing but a habit of action. So the more times that you were to repeat that particular action, then that becomes a habit, and that actually ends up becoming your behavior. So attitude, so thought leads to action. Attitude therefore leads to behavior. And it is natural therefore that if you have a positive attitude, then it will lead to a positive behavior. If you have a negative attitude, it leads to negative behavior. If you have a good attitude, it will lead to good behavior, and so on and so forth. So it's very important for us to keep revisiting those attitudes that Krishna talks about and saying, how can we, yesterday, if you recall, when we ended the program, we said, try and pick and choose at least 2 from self, 2 from others, and 2 from work, and try and see if you can inculcate that into your day-to-day life. So he talks about, now he steps up, and he takes, if this were a game, he takes the game even further. In chapter 16, at the beginning of chapter 16, from verse 1 to verse 3, he reveals to us some very interesting behaviors. So he moves from attitudes into behaviors, and he classifies these amazing behaviors in chapter 16 from verse 1 to verse 3. And he says, in today's context, if we were to practice this on a daily basis, whether it is in your business, whether it is in your family, whether it is in your social, whether it is in your spiritual, whether it is in your health, in any of the dimensions of the world, you will be able to succeed. Actually, if you look at it, the whole point is this, that we have really about 6 different dimensions to our life. We've got our career, we've got our business, whatever, we've got our family, we've got our health, we've got society, we've got spiritual, and maybe a hobby. So these behaviors that we're going to delve into today are behaviors that will help us manage any of these aspects of our life and make some amount of sense. So any goal that you set, any purpose that you have in your life is part of one of these 6 areas. It could be a business goal, it could be a family goal, it could be a social goal, it could be a spiritual goal, it could be a health-related goal, or it could be a hobby or an interest-related goal. All of these can get influenced. So let's see what are the beauties. And going back by the same model that we looked at yesterday, which is self, others, and work, I have classified these with the permission of Sri Krishna into the following. So the first one that he talks about is fearlessness. And these are all about the self. The first behavior that he talks about is fearlessness. That if you have set your mind to do something, don't be fearful, you will gain success. The second one that he talks about is purity of heart or purpose. That whatever we do, we must never have a secret agenda in what we are doing. If there is a purity of heart and purpose, then the behavior is going to be like that. He talks about steadfastness. He talks about charity, about our ability to give. And we are seeing so many examples today all around us of people. There is an outpouring of charity in the world. People are contributing grains to people who need it. People are contributing food for the homeless. And there is so much of an outpouring of charity right now, almost like in any kind of a war situation. He talks about self-control. He talks about truthfulness. He talks about absence of anger. He talks about gentleness. He talks about modesty. He talks about steadfastness being not fickle. Okay, he talks about boldness, and he says there must be an absence of conceit or pride. Now, these are the behaviors that he is talking about, which will help us in terms of managing self and pushing ourselves ahead. Fearlessness, purity of heart or purpose, steadfastness, charity, self-control, truthfulness, absence of anger, gentleness, modesty, steadfastness, not being fickle, boldness, absence of conceit or pride. And he says, if we can practice these particular behaviors, then there is no doubt that we will each be able to advance to our higher purpose. Then he comes to managing others. He says, what are the kind of behaviors that you need to practice to help people, how to manage others? And he talks about some very interesting behaviors here. He says, causing harm to none, tranquility, without deceit, okay, not slandering people when they are not there. And this is a big thing today that we find, that we spend almost 20 to 30% of our time gossiping about people who are not there in the room. And this is something that he says, if you can avoid, you will move ahead in your life. He talks about compassion. He talks about forgiveness. He says patience. And he says it is the absence of any hatred, no enmity to anybody at all. And this is another big thing. We waste a lot of time carrying a certain grudge or carrying a certain hatred in our life. And that is something that slowly but surely, like a cancer, destroys us. And then he talks about managing work. He says, work with a spirit of sacrifice. Okay? Life being a lifelong learner. And this is something that, unfortunately, all of us give up very early. We believe that we know everything there is to know about a certain subject. We think that we are Paramagyanis, and then that really, really is the cause of our destruction. He talks about being a lifelong learner. He says, study the scriptures. They're fantastic. They give you all the answers that you need, that you want in life. Performing purifying austerities, pursuing knowledge, renunciation, being consistent, being transparent. One of the biggest problems in the modern world, which employees especially find very, very difficult to handle, is the fact that their bosses are not transparent. They're not consistent. They say one thing, they mean something, they do something else. And he says, be consistent, be transparent. He says, don't be covetous. Don't desire for what is not rightfully belonging to you. So here are a set of about 25 or 26 very interesting behaviors. We talked about 18 attitudes, and he expands it to 25 or 26 interesting behaviors. Remember one very important point. If it is thought that leads to action, and if it is attitude that leads to behavior, and if it is positive attitude that leads to positive behavior, or good attitude that leads to good behavior, you just need to figure out how can you cultivate 3 or 4 great attitudes, one in self, one in others, one in work, and one more any which way that you want. Because one great attitude, one positive attitude, one nice attitude, one good attitude will lead to multiple behaviors. And that is the beauty of the Bhagavad Gita, that Krishna talks about these 26 different behaviors, and he says, look, practice these behaviors and pick and choose one of those attitudes, and it will lead to multiple behaviors which can be applied by you in all aspects of your life. As we discovered, the 6 aspects that are part and parcel of your life. So Krishna goes on to say, these qualities, these behaviors are divine qualities. And if you can actually practice these divine qualities on a regular basis, then there is nothing but nothing that will come in your way and do it. However, we talked yesterday about our day before yesterday about the canals of the mind and how these canals can get blocked by various obstacles. So what could be some qualities that are divisive qualities? What are some qualities that can come in the way of your achieving what you want to achieve? And in the same chapter in verse 4, Krishna goes on to elucidate some amazing stuff. He talks about 6 of them. And he says, the first one he talks about is hypocrisy. He cautions us against them. He says, hypocrisy. Don't be ostentatious. We've got this tendency to think that I am the best, I'm bigger, I'm the biggest, I'm the greatest person on earth. And don't be ostentatious. Don't flaunt your wealth. You may be very rich, which is fantastic. You worked hard and you earned a lot of money. There's nothing wrong with the wealth that you have, which is good. But you don't have to flaunt your wealth to anybody. Second, he talks about arrogance. Okay, letting the ego delude you. That I have everything, that I've created everything. That feeling of I is something. I think Ravish asked us this question in the first session or the second session. And this is what the answer is, Ravish. Don't get into a situation that I am doing everything. Don't let the ego, let your arrogance go forward. And then the third thing that he talks about is self-conceit, that there is no one as good as I am in this world. And then the fourth he talks about is anger. Now, anger invariably comes from a sense of entitlement, that this is something that I'm entitled to. You know, when a child gets angry with its parents because the parents are denying the child something for whatever reason, then the child starts crying, gets very angry, throws a tantrum because the child develops a sense of entitlement that I am entitled to this. So when I ask for a chocolate, when I ask for a biscuit, I need to be given this. I have a sense of entitlement to this. And then he talks about another very, very interesting behavior, which he says that is a divisive one, which is rudeness, which is being irritated, especially rudeness. I find this to be so, manifest today, where people look down on someone who asks for help. Remember, asking for help is a sign of strength. When somebody says, look, I need some help, that means somebody needs some help. Somebody is actually putting down and saying, please help me. It is a sign of strength. There is no need to be rude if you cannot fulfill somebody's ask. But you can actually be very nice about it, whether it is family, whether it is colleagues, whether it is co-worker, with somebody in the middle of the road. There's no point in being rude. And finally, he talks about ignorance, not having an open mind to learn. So here are the 6: hypocrisy, arrogance, self-conceit, anger, rudeness, and ignorance. This is verse 4 in chapter 16. And he says these are divisive qualities, because these are qualities that will not help you advance to the goal that you want in your life. So all of these, prevent you from achieving what you want to achieve in your life. All of these prevent you from getting to your goal. In the Bhagavatam, I'll just jump from one text to the other. In the Bhagavatam, especially at the end when Krishna is talking to Uddhava, and when Krishna senses that his avatara is nearing an end, and he talks to Uddhava and he says, Uddhava, you need to go and tell the whole world my message of Bhakti Yoga. In that, Krishna tells Uddhava that, look, there is an interplay of action. All action is caused because of 3 things: Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, and Kriya Shakti. And look at the beauty of these things: Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, and Kriya Shakti. The Ichha that comes from wanting to achieve your higher purpose of goal, that gives you a certain Shakti in life. The Jnana or the wisdom that is required to work on achieving that goal or that higher purpose. And Kriya is to be focused and concentrated on your work from a Karma Yoga perspective in terms of going and achieving your goal. So Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, and Kriya Shakti. If these 3 Shaktis are in alignment, then there is quite really nothing that you can't achieve in your life. But if these 3 are not aligned, if the desire that you have is not something which is a great desire, then obviously the jnana that you need to achieve is going to be a ketta jnana or a bad kind of a knowledge, not wisdom. And then the actions that you will take is also not going to be a very happy action. Swami Chinmayananda puts this very beautifully. In one of his speeches, Swami Chinmayananda talks about 2 individuals. And he says both are working to reach a certain goal, a certain objective in life. One of them manages to get there, using all 3, which is Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, and Kriya Shakti. One of them manages to get there and the other doesn't get there. And Swamiji wonders, why is it that one can get there and the other cannot? Likewise in our life, if you see today, there are so many of us. There would be 2 of us, 3 of us, 4 of us, 5 of us, people in the same family. All of us start out with the same kind of a goal or a purpose in life. We have a certain Ichha, we have a certain wisdom of Jnana, and we perform a certain Kriya. But some of us get to what we want to get to, and a lot of us don't get to what we want to get to. And Swamiji says that the reason why this is happening is that the person who gets to what he wants to get to, has managed to align all the 3 Shaktis in one direction, in the higher purpose of his life, the Ichha, Jnana, and the Kriya Shakti in one way so that you can get there. Whereas somebody who's struggling to still reach there is someone who has not managed to align all 3. Maybe the Ichha is very strong, but the wisdom required, the Jnana that is required, is not there, or maybe the kriya is misplaced, and therefore you can't get to where you want to get to in life. So what is it that prevents? Each of us has this benefit. What is it that prevents us from doing that particular kriya to getting to what we want to get to in life? Is a very interesting question. The fact remains that if you see that, why would you not want to get there? Because there are very simple issues there. So some of us are struggling to get to success, and some of us are not getting there. So when you don't get to what you want to get to, you're obviously going to be blaming the rest of the world. Okay? And this is a very easy thing that someone who's still struggling to get to his goal does. You start blaming your world. You start blaming fate. You start blaming destiny. It's like the young student who comes back home from an exam and turns around and say, that today the question papers were completely out of syllabus. So you need to peg your blame on somebody else. You need to say that, something happened, the cat crossed the road, there was a black cat, and there's so many things that you're constantly blaming as to why you're still struggling. But remember, it is primarily because these three things are not in alignment: the Ichha Shakti, the Jnana Shakti, and the Kriya Shakti. Because of a non-alignment, this is preventing you from getting to where you want to do. So whenever you start blaming the world, whenever you start blaming others in the world, Swami Chinmayananda has a very nice term for these people. He calls them escapists from life. He says, these are people who are escaping, because these are people whose actions are bringing unhappiness to themselves. So the more you blame the external world, the more you blame the people around you, the more you blame your family, the more you blame people who are not there in the room, the more you start blaming, you start searching for somebody outside to blame. Obviously, you're going to be continuously unhappy. So what could be the reason why this alignment is missing in life? And here is where those 6 deadly sins actually come in. The Shataripus, or the Arshada Varga that they call. Kama, lust or desire. Krodha, which is anger. Lobha, which is greed. Moha, which is attachment. And Mada, which is pride or arrogance, the ego. And Matsarya, which is jealousy or envy. It is one of these or all of these acting in consonance that come and prevent the alignment that is required in all of these. So how do we figure this out? So when you do not achieve success, you start blaming your circumstances. Okay? And when you blame your circumstances, you need somebody to blame them. So ultimately, all of us are swayed when we need to reach one of these deadly sins. Okay? So if you look at it like this, it starts with the tenets of the Karma Yoga that Krishna talks about. And he says, if you were to do your work in a way that you are not attached to the fruits of your action, because that causes inefficiency in action. And this is what that whole meaning of that, verse number 47 is, that don't cause inefficiency in your action. Because if your action is inefficient, then these 6 sins will come into play. That the fact that there is a certain amount of inefficiency in whatever you're doing is leading to this. So let us look at the interplay of these particular 6 senses. The one, unsuccessful actions will lead you to a situation, to unsatiated desires, which is kama. So is desire bad? No, there must be a certain amount of desire. There is nothing wrong with desire. You must desire to move up in life. You must desire a particular goal. You must want to desire. But Krishna is making a fine distinction and saying these are unsatiated desires. And that is what leads to kama, lust. That I must have this at any particular cost. It doesn't matter what is the cost, but I need to get this particular desire, this kama to get to me. An unsatiated desire invariably leads to a sense of entitlement. How can I not have this? And therefore causes anger. So it is kama that leads to krodha. And when you have that anger, it clouds your mind completely. And with a clouded mind, you are not able to think rationally. And this leads to a lot of greed. You get into the situation where you say, I am going to acquire this at any cost. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm going to go there and I'm going to get to this and I'm going to acquire it at any cost. Very much like what Duryodhana was doing with the Pandavas in the entire war. That look, I don't care whether this is right or wrong. I need this particular kingdom. I am not going to give up my share, and therefore I will protect it. I will do whatever it is required to do it. So Kama, Krodha, and Lobha. And then we go on to the next three. When you have excessive greed, then it leads you to a desire to want more and more and more. Even if you can't enjoy it, you want to give it away to your progeny. You want to create a huge amount of wealth which you want to leave for your children. And what a waste of time. Look at some of the people who are acquiring wealth in a completely illegal way. What do they take with them when they die? Nothing. And there is a very famous theory that says that whatever you acquire today, it is the third generation that is going to fritter it away. So what is the point? You leave it to your son and his son is going to completely fritter away that entire wealth. There is no point in that. So excessive greed leads to this whole issue of moha, of attachment. When you are attached to something, it leads to mada or arrogance. You get into a situation where you start believing that my possessions, my things that I've got is the greatest on earth. And that leads to a certain amount of arrogance. And finally, all that you have which is temporary leads to a situation where you start feeling, I have this, he doesn't have it. He has more of what I have. So my attachment, my possessions are not good enough. And therefore it leads to this whole sin called jealousy, which is Matsarya. So Kama, which gives way to Krodha, which gives way to Lobha, which gives way to Moha, which gives way to Mada, and which gives way to Matsarya. These are the 6 deadly sins that we need to be very, very careful about. And we need to figure out how are we going to actually avoid these 6 enemies in our life. Because remember one thing, these 6 sins are a downward spiral. Okay? Once you get on, and it's a very slippery downward spiral that you can get into. Each of them leading to the other, leading to the other, leading to the other. And therefore, the goal that you have set for yourself, the higher purpose that you have in your life, is something that you can completely forget about once you become a victim to these deadly sins. So this is a downward spiral, and this downward spiral ensures that you are completely on a one-way ticket right down the ladder, and you're not going to get anywhere. So how can we achieve our goal when our mind is completely preoccupied with one of these 6 sins? And this is what I was telling about in the subject, that these are the ones that prevent you from reaching your goal. You have to figure out a way of how can you make sure that they don't feed off each other and then make sure that you do. But is this easy? It is not. That is the sad part of life. We live in a very deeply comparative world. That is one of the tragedies of the world. We've become a very comparative society. All the time, there is nothing called an absolute in society today. Unfortunately, everything is relative. My happiness has now become relative. Look at the way we handle children at birth. We're all comparing them. This child is fairer than so and so. This child is healthier than so and so. This child is cuter than so and so. This child looks like the father. Look, there is complete comparison that we start with the child right from the child is born. And this curse is something that we continue through and through and through life. So when we live in a comparative world, we need to be very careful that if the world is going to be comparing us with people, then we need to insulate ourselves against that particular kind of a comparison. We need to start believing that we are happy and we need to be looking at ourselves. Just for those of my friends who are running businesses right now, who are running industries, you see, the Western concept of motivation is a very comparative concept. In the West, motivation is nothing but a combination of two words, motive and action. So if you want any action, in the West, it is believed that there must be a certain motive that you have to pander to. And this motive is entirely external. Okay? Western thought teaches us that the motive by which people will do something, by which your employees will do something, is really a combination of two things. One, it could be fear or it could be reward. You could give a reward to someone, and that reward that you give to someone is something that will motivate that person to work hard or to do some action. Or it could be fear, that I'm going to remove you from your job, I'm going to punish you, I'm going to do something. That is something that is there. Now look at how interestingly this concept is ingrained, even in the way we teach children. Okay? The child is studying only for two reasons. Number one, if he gets a good mark in the class, then his teacher will say, what a brilliant student. When he comes back home, the mother or father will give a chocolate and possibly send a WhatsApp image of that mark sheet to the entire family group. Or if he doesn't study hard enough and unfortunately doesn't get the marks that he should have got or he thought he could get, then invariably there is a punishment. And the punishment could be corporal, that punishment. So this entire motivation theory, which is based on reward or punishment, is something which is now coming apart. That particular motivation theory we are now finding is just not working. So the Bhagavad Gita is actually a phenomenal, path ahead for us, which talks about this entire issue of internal motivation. The entire song of the Gita, the entire discourse is completely about this. All the 18 chapters, all the 700 odd verses are about this, saying, Arjuna, discover the internal motivation that you require to overcome these 6 deadly sins and to move forward. I would urge all of you to read the 18th chapter very carefully, because the 18th chapter is when he brings the entire discourse very, very beautifully to a kind of a conclusion. And he talks during the 18th chapter, especially when Arjuna at the beginning of the chapter asks him, "Oh Krishna, can you tell me the difference between sannyasa and tyaga?" And he makes that beautiful thought of how you should renounce, especially in that chapter, I think in verse 2. And he makes a very beautiful saying that sannyasa is about renouncing actions that are desire-led. Okay? So renounce any actions that are based on desire, which is kama, because then you get into those 7 deadly sins. Whereas tyaga is abandoning all the attachment to any of the fruits of your action. Be completely focused on what you need to be doing. And that is the central message that I'd like to leave you all with today. That look, can we be completely desireless? Can we go completely out of our goal? No, I don't think we should do that. We're living in a world where we need to provide for our families. We're living in a world where we need to create joy. We are living in a world where we need to work. So don't even look at it. And therefore, in chapter 18, verse 47, he gives one very interesting last point of advice to all of us. He says, better it is to live one's ideal of perfection than the ideals of another. You know what we talked about, this entire comparative situation of life. He says, don't live life according to somebody else's ideals of perfection. Live life according to your own ideals of perfection. However inefficient it be, it doesn't matter. So long as you perform it well, according to your intrinsic nature, you will move to your higher purpose. And that's a beautiful shloka that actually Krishna talks about in the entire Bhagavad Gita. And finally, Krishna tells us in chapter 18, verse number 66, he says, renouncing all other ideals, take refuge in me alone. I will liberate you from all your sins. Ladies and gentlemen, if we can work with this thought, that look, we have been put on this earth, and this is what we need to perform. Our duty is to figure out how we can move up to the higher purpose in our life. Let us spend some time in solitude, discover what is that purpose that we need to achieve in life, and then move to that. Just before I end, There is another book that I very strongly recommend that everybody tries and reads, as we talked about it yesterday, which is the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is also very interesting. And finally there, Krishna, I think, beautifully sums it up to Uddhava. This is a conversation that happens much after the Mahabharata war. And Krishna beautifully sums this up for Arjuna. And this is something that I'd like to leave for us, saying, how do we avoid these deadly sins? He says, you must practice ahimsa, which means an unwillingness to hurt anybody. From today's context, we are talking about a win-win kind of a relationship with everybody. That's what we're looking at. He says, talk the truth, satyam, speaking the truth at all times, because this is something you don't have to then cover your tracks. You don't have to worry about what did I say now, what did I say then. A lot of time is wasted, ladies and gentlemen, because of the fact that we are not speaking the truth, and therefore we are trying to cover up what we've said a little while ago. And then he says asteyam, which is non-attachment to anything, and he talks of asangam, which means not being attached to any person, anybody, any person, any being. Then he says practice lajja, which is being shameful to perform any unworthy actions. And then he talks about asancham, which is don't hoard any wealth. It's a complete waste of time. Have enough for yourself. Empower your children. See, remember one thing. All of us, my generation, we grew up with what I call the scarcity gene. We didn't have enough in life. So many of us will remember standing in a ration queue, waiting to buy sugar, waiting to buy kerosene, waiting to buy rice. We remember those days. So many of us know for a fact that we never had cooking gas at home, and it would take a month and a half to get a cooking gas. But that day is over. We are no longer living in scarcity times. We are now living in the times of abundance. So there is no need to hoard wealth. Figure out a way of empowering your children to work and to enjoy, which is why the whole world is now coming back and saying, let us give away a lot of our wealth. Let us not corrupt our children by leaving so much of wealth to them that they will not know how to work hard and create their own wealth. And then he talks about astikam, which is a firm faith in the existence of a higher power. Whatever we do, we must remember this all the time, that today we are mere instruments. We're not the doers. We are people who have been put here because we have been given a certain responsibility to execute something in our life. And that is an opportunity that has been given to us. And then he talks about brahmacharya, which is celibacy, which means basically denying the pleasure senses, the five senses, the indriyas, that will continuously keep doing it. Then he talks about maunam, silence. He says, look, make sure that you don't waste time with people who are not aligned with you and your higher purpose. He said, there is no point in arguing with the world. Make sure that you be silent at times. There is no point in doing that. Then he talks about sthiryam, which is firmness. He says you must be firm in your faith, in your convictions. And then he talks about kshama, which is forgiveness. And he says practice kshama, be forgiving, overcome hurt. There are people who will hurt you physically. There are people who will hurt you emotionally. There are people who will let you down in life. That is their karma. That is their action. That is their kriya. Don't allow that to influence your life. Adopt a feeling of forgiveness. Give up. It doesn't really matter. You are going to be a much better human being than they. Practice abhaya, which is being fearlessness. If there is anybody who is opposing your higher purpose, your way of life, then don't be worried. Make sure that because you have truth on your side, be fearless. And finally, he says, be a sthita prajna. Practice equanimity. Things will not go our way. It doesn't really matter. In the next 3 months, in the next 6 months, in the next 9 months of this year, there are things that will not happen the way we thought it will happen. That is a fact of life. But if each one of us starts taking life and practicing these principles of the Gita, then we will certainly find a roadmap that will help us enjoy this journey called life and making sense out of this whole thing. Thank you very much.